girl slips into icy water, but an alert wheelchair-bound man changes her fate. Frank Miller had fished along the banks of the Missouri River every morning for 15 years, always in the same spot where the rocks formed a perfect natural step for his wheelchair. That Tuesday in June, the biting cold of the Midwest winter made his hands tremble as he adjusted the line on his bamboo fishing rod. Suddenly, he heard the sound of rocks tumbling and a sharp scream that shattered the morning silence. Turning his head, he saw a dark-haired girl slipping on the wet rocks and falling backward into the icy river current. Frank's heart raced as he watched the child flailing in the water, being swept away by the strong seasonal current. Without hesitation, he extended his bamboo rod toward her, shouting for her to grab hold. The distance was considerable, but years of fishing had honed his precision. Desperate, the girl managed to clutch the tip of the rod with both hands. "Hold on tight, sweetheart, don't let go no matter what," Frank yelled, using all his strength to pull her against the current. The effort was immense. His arms ached, but he couldn't give up. Inch by inch, he managed to bring her back to the shore. When he finally pulled her out of the water, both were gasping for air. The girl coughed, spitting up water, shivering violently from the cold. Frank quickly took off his checkered flannel shirt and wrapped it around her soaked body. "It's all right now, honey, you're safe," he said softly. When the girl lifted her face to thank him, Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Those brown eyes, that face shape. It was impossible. For a moment, it was like seeing a ghost from the past. The girl studied him curiously too, but there was something else in her gaze. Fear. "Are you Frank, the one who lives in the blue house at the end of the street?" she asked, still trembling. "That's me, and who are you, sweetheart?" "I'm Emily. Grandma Dorothy always tells me not to go near you," she confessed, lowering her eyes. The name Dorothy hit Frank like a punch to the gut. After all these years, hearing that name still hurt. But he tried to stay composed in front of the child. "Why were you playing alone by the river? This place is dangerous," he asked, changing the subject. The girl's eyes welled up with tears. "I was running away from home. Grandma Dorothy said I have to go live with my aunt and uncle in Denver because she can't take care of me anymore. But I don't want to leave," she sobbed. Frank's heart ached. The girl was clearly in pain, and he knew that feeling of abandonment all too well. "Emily, you can't run away like this. Your grandma must be worried. She doesn't care about me. She just keeps saying I'm a burden, that she's too old, that she can't work at her sewing anymore. She says I'll have better opportunities in Denver, but I don't believe her," the girl protested. Frank studied her closely. She couldn't be more than 8 years old, yet she spoke with a maturity far beyond her years, the kind that comes from too much hardship. There was something familiar about her, beyond just her eyes. The way she furrowed her brows when angry was exactly how Dorothy had looked when she was young. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. Emily, tell me something. How long have you lived with your grandma? Frank asked, still puzzled. "Forever. My mom left when I was a baby, and I never knew my dad. Grandma Dorothy always says he was a bad man, that he abandoned my mom when she was pregnant." Frank swallowed hard. The puzzle pieces were falling into place in a way that left him increasingly unsettled. "And your mom, what was her name?" "Hope. Hope Miller," answered Emily, unaware of the impact of her words. Frank's world stopped. Miller was his last name, and Hope. Dorothy had chosen that name when they still dreamed of having children together. Could it be? "Sweetheart, you need to go home. Your grandmother must be desperate," he said, trying to keep his composure. "Can you take me? I'm scared to go back alone. And promise you won't tell her I was running away," Emily pleaded, her eyes begging. Frank hesitated. He hadn't set foot in that part of town in 15 years, precisely to avoid running into Dorothy. But he couldn't let the girl go alone, especially soaking wet and shivering like that. "All right, but you'll have to push me. These streets are a bit rough for my chair." Emily quickly agreed. Along the way, she opened up more to Frank. She told him her grandmother had days when she could barely get out of bed, sometimes forgot to make food, and had lost sewing clients because she could no longer see well enough to finish the seams. She gets really sad sometimes. I hear her crying in her room at night, talking to herself about things I don't understand, about people who are gone, about wrong choices, Emily said, straining to push the chair. And you never asked about those people? I tried, but she always changes the subject or gets angry. Once she was looking at an old photo and cried so hard. When I asked who it was, she tore it up and said they were ghosts from the past. Frank's heart raced with every word. Dorothy had always been stubborn and proud, but she was also the most loving woman he'd ever known. Imagining her suffering alone, raising a granddaughter without help, stirred feelings in him he hadn't expected. When they reached the street where Dorothy lived, Frank recognized the house immediately. It was the same one she'd lived in with her parents 30 years ago, but now it was visibly run down. The paint was peeling, the gate rusted, and some roof tiles were missing. "That's it, the greenhouse," Emily pointed. Frank stopped the chair in front of the gate, gathering the courage to face a moment he'd avoided for so long. Emily ran to open the gate and shouted, "Grandma! Grandma! I'm here!" The front door swung open so hard it hit the wall. Dorothy rushed out, her hair disheveled and tears in her eyes. At 62, she was still a beautiful woman, but Frank noticed how fragile she looked, thinner than he remembered. "Emily! My God, where were you? I searched the whole house, asked the neighbors," Dorothy said, clutching her granddaughter desperately. Then she looked up and saw Frank in the wheelchair. Time stood still. 30 years of hurt, pain, and longing collided in that gaze. Dorothy turned pale as a ghost. "Frank," she whispered, as if seeing an apparition. "Hello, Dorothy," he replied, his voice thick. Emily glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Grandma, Mr. Frank saved me. I slipped in the river, and he pulled me out with his fishing pole. He's a hero," the girl said, still oblivious. Dorothy looked at her soaked granddaughter, then at Frank, trying to process it. "You saved my granddaughter?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The girl was in danger. Anyone would have done the same," Frank replied, trying to sound indifferent but failing miserably. Dorothy helped Emily inside, but lingered at the door, unsure whether to invite Frank in or send him away. The awkwardness was palpable. "Grandma, Mr. Frank brought me back. He was really kind to me," Emily insisted. Thank you for saving my granddaughter," Dorothy finally said. "But you should go now." The coldness in her voice stung more than Frank expected. But he understood. There was a lot of water under the bridge. "Of course, take good care of the girl. And Dorothy, she told me she's thinking of sending her to Denver." Dorothy stiffened. "That's none of your business." "Maybe not, but since I saved your granddaughter's life, can I give my opinion? She loves you, and she's really suffering over this idea. You don't understand the situation. You have no right to tell me how to care for my family," Dorothy shot back angrily. "Our family," Frank murmured so softly only Dorothy heard. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "No, don't you dare say that. You chose to leave our lives. You chose to chase that crazy dream of being a rally driver. You chose to abandon me." "I didn't abandon you, Dorothy. You're the one who didn't want to come with me. You chose to stay here, obey your parents, marry that accountant they picked for you. And look where your choices got you," Dorothy said, glancing at the wheelchair with a mix of sadness and anger. Emily, who had been listening from the doorway, finally understood there was history between her grandmother and Frank. A painful history. "Grandma, did you know each other before?" she asked. Dorothy and Frank exchanged glances, both realizing the child had heard too much. "It's a long story, Emily. Let's go inside. You need to change out of those wet clothes," Dorothy said, trying to end the conversation, but Emily wasn't willing to let it go. "Was Mr. Frank your boyfriend, Grandma?" Dorothy took a deep breath. "A long time ago, before you were born, before your mother was born. But that's all in the past." "Why did you fight?" "Curious child," Dorothy muttered. "Frank, thank you for saving my granddaughter. You can go now." Frank nodded and began wheeling himself away, but Emily ran after him. "Mr. Frank, thank you for saving me, and could I visit you someday to thank you properly?" Dorothy was about to protest, But Frank answered first, "Of course you can, sweetheart. My house is the blue one at the end of Maple Street, but only if your grandmother allows it." Emily looked at Dorothy with pleading eyes. "That's not a good idea," Dorothy said. "Please, Grandma. He saved my life." Dorothy looked at Frank, then at her granddaughter. She was clearly torn between protecting Emily from a complicated situation and acknowledging the debt she owed him. "We'll see," she finally said. Frank left with a heavy heart. The encounter had affected him more than he'd imagined. Seeing Dorothy again, learning about Emily, about hope. There were so many unanswered questions. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about their conversation, Dorothy's words, the way she'd looked at his wheelchair. There was resentment there, but also pain, as if she blamed herself for the accident. The next day, Frank was back at the river, but he couldn't focus on fishing. He kept staring at the spot where he'd saved Emily, replaying every detail of his meeting with Dorothy. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Emily approaching, carrying a lunchbox. "Mr. Frank, I brought you some lunch. Grandma Dorothy made sweet corn pudding, but I didn't tell her it was for you," she said with a mischievous smile. "Emily, your grandmother won't like that you came here. She went shopping, and I wanted to talk to you. I have so many questions." Frank sighed. The girl's curiosity was understandable, but the situation was delicate. "Go ahead then. Did you love my grandma very much?" Emily's direct question caught Frank off guard. "Yes, I did. Very much." "And do you still?" Frank was silent for a long moment. "Some people leave a mark on your life forever, Emily, even when they're no longer with you. But Grandma's right here. Why don't you get back together?" "It's not that simple, sweetheart. Too much has happened. Too much hurt." "What kind of hurt?" Frank looked at the girl. There was a wisdom in her eyes that struck him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Your grandfather, the man your grandmother married after we separated. Was he a good man? I never met my grandpa. Grandma says he left when my mum was little, that he couldn't handle the responsibility of being a father. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Dorothy had suffered a second abandonment. That explained some of her resentment toward him. And about your mother, Hope. Does your grandmother ever talk about her? Not much. Only that she was very young when she had me, that my father ran away when he found out she was pregnant, and that she got very sick after I was born. Grandma always gets sad when she talks about her. Frank felt a growing suspicion but didn't want to assume anything without being sure. Emily, show me something. Do you have any pictures of your mother? The girl shook her head. Grandma kept them all. She says it's too painful to look at them, but I've seen some hidden in her closet. What do you mean, hidden? There's a shoebox on top of the wardrobe. Sometimes when Grandma thinks I'm asleep, she takes the box down and looks at the photos, crying softly. Frank's heart raced. Would it be possible to show me those photos? Emily hesitated. I don't know if I should go through Grandma's things without permission. You're right, I'm sorry for asking. But Emily's curiosity was piqued. If there was any connection between her mother and Frank, she wanted to find out. You know what? Grandma won't be back until late afternoon. If you want, we could take a quick look. Frank knew it wasn't right, but the need to uncover the truth was stronger. All right, but just a quick look. They went together to Dorothy's house. Emily unlocked the door with the key she wore around her neck and led Frank to her grandmother's room. The wheelchair barely fit through the narrow doorway, but they managed. Emily climbed onto a chair and reached for the shoebox on top of the wardrobe. When she opened it, dozens of photos, yellowed letters, and a few small trinkets were revealed. The first photo Frank saw was of a young woman, about 18, pregnant, smiling shyly at the camera. Her face was a perfect blend of a young Dorothy and his own features. My God, he murmured. What's wrong, Mr. Miller? You've gone pale. Frank picked up the photo with trembling hands. There was no doubt. Hope had his eyes, his nose, but Dorothy's smile and hair. Emily, you said your mother's name was Hope Miller, right? Yes. And your father's last name? Grandma never told me. She just said he was irresponsible. Frank kept looking through the photos. There were several of Hope growing up, from childhood until just before Emily was born. In everyone, the resemblance to him was undeniable. Then he found something that made his blood run cold. A birth certificate. Hope Dorothy Miller Thompson, born March 15th, 1995. Father's name, Frank Miller. Emily, he said, his voice choked. I need to sit down. What happened? Did you find something important? Frank showed the certificate to the girl, who couldn't read well yet. What does it say? It's your mother's birth certificate. And here it says I'm her father. Emily's eyes widened. You're my grandpa? Tears streamed down Frank's face. 30 years without knowing he had a daughter. 29 years without knowing he had a granddaughter. It looks that way, kiddo, it looks that way. Emily threw her arms around Frank's neck, crying too, but with joy. I always wanted a grandpa, and now I find out I've always had one. Frank hugged her, feeling a mix of happiness and anger. Happiness at discovering a family he never knew existed. Anger at Dorothy for hiding it from him for so long. Why did Grandma never tell me? Why didn't she ever tell you about Mom? I don't know, Emily, but we'll find out. They spent the whole afternoon looking at the photos and talking. Frank told her about his life, about the accident that left him in a wheelchair, about how he had thought of Dorothy all these years. Emily told him about her life with Dorothy, about their financial struggles, about the dreams she had. When Dorothy came home around 5 in the afternoon, she found Frank and Emily sitting in the living room, the box of photos open between them. Dorothy's face went pale. What are you doing? She asked, her voice trembling. Grandma, why did you never tell me that Mr. Frank is my grandfather? Emily asked, straight to the point. Dorothy leaned against the wall as if she might faint. Emily, go to your room. No, I want to know the truth. Why did you hide this from me? Emily, listen to your grandmother, Frank said gently. We need to talk alone. The girl hesitated but obeyed, though not before kissing Frank on the forehead. You had no right to go through my things, Dorothy said, as soon as they were alone. And you had no right to hide my daughter from me, Frank shot back. Dorothy began to cry. You left, Frank. You chose your races, your cars, your life of adventure. You didn't want responsibilities. That's not true, and you know it. I asked you to come with me. I wanted to marry you. After 2 years of promising marriage and always putting it off, always saying you needed to settle down first, that it wasn't the right time. When I found out I was pregnant, you were off competing in that insane rally in Los Angeles. Frank remembered. The 1994 American Rally Championship. He had been gone for 3 months, training and competing. You could have told me when I got back. Got back how? In a wheelchair, bitter, depressed, blaming me for the accident. I never blamed you for the accident. Not in words, but I saw it in your eyes. You thought if you had come after me that day instead of trying to call, the accident wouldn't have happened. Frank fell silent. She wasn't entirely wrong. Deep down, he had always wondered how things might have been different if he had gone to her house in person that day instead of trying to settle things over the phone. Dorothy, no matter what happened between us, you had no right to hide my daughter from me. Your daughter? Dorothy laughed bitterly. Where were you when she was born? When she had a high fever and almost didn't survive at 3 months old? When she took her first steps, said her first word, graduated from elementary school? Every word from Dorothy felt like a knife to Frank's heart. I didn't know she existed. If you had told me... Told you what? That I was pregnant with the child of a man who left me to chase an impossible dream? Who came back broken physically and emotionally? I never left you. We fought, I stormed out, and the next day I had the accident. When I got out of the hospital 4 months later, you had already married Richard. Dorothy stopped crying and looked at him in surprise. What? You married Richard Thompson 2 weeks after my accident, or did you think I wouldn't find out? Frank, Dorothy whispered, her voice choked. I married Richard because Hope needed a father, and because I thought you had left town for good. Why would you think that? Because you vanished. After our fight, you disappeared. No one knew where you were. Even your own family said you had gone to Los Angeles to start a new life. Frank understood everything. The accident had happened on the road to Los Angeles. He had been driving there at high speed, furious after the fight, when he lost control of the car on a curve. He was hospitalized in Los Angeles for months, unable to tell anyone because he was in a coma. Dorothy, I had the accident on the road to Los Angeles. I was in a coma for 2 months, then another 2 months undergoing surgeries and physical therapy. When I came back, you were already married and pregnant. Or so I thought. Pregnant. Frank, I married Richard when I was already 6 months pregnant. Hope was your daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. 30 years of misunderstandings, of unnecessary pain, of lives torn apart because of a terrible accident and communication that never happened. My God, what have we done? Dorothy murmured. How did Richard react when he found out Hope wasn't his daughter? Dorothy lowered her eyes. He always knew. I told him the truth before agreeing to marry him. Richard was a good man, Frank. He accepted raising Hope as his own, but when Hope grew up and started looking just like you, he couldn't take it. People in town began talking, asking questions. He felt humiliated. He left when she was 5. And Hope, did she know the truth? She did. When she turned 15, I told her everything. She was furious with me for hiding it, said she wanted to meet you, but what? But I convinced her you wouldn't want anything to do with her, that you'd made your choice when you left. She died believing her father had rejected her. Frank felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Is she at peace where she is now? He asked, using the word they always used instead of died. Dorothy nodded, still crying. Complications during childbirth. The doctors did everything they could, but they couldn't save them both. Emily was born, but Hope. And Emily? Who's her father? A boy Hope's age. When he found out about the pregnancy, he disappeared. Just like... Dorothy stopped, realizing what she was about to say. Just like me, you were going to say? I'm sorry. I know it wasn't your fault. But back then, that's what I thought. Frank took a deep breath, trying to process everything he'd just learned. Dorothy, we lost 30 years of our lives because of a misunderstanding. We lost our daughter because of my stubbornness. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Don't blame yourself alone. I could have tried harder too, searched for you after I left the hospital. Why didn't you? Pride, anger, and fear that you were happy with Richard. Just then, Emily appeared at the bedroom door. Can I come in? I heard you talking about my mum. Dorothy and Frank exchanged glances, both realizing they needed to be honest with the girl. Come here, sweetheart, Dorothy said. Emily sat between them. Is it true that Mr. Frank is my grandfather? She asked. Yes, it's true, Dorothy replied. And I'm sorry for keeping this from you. Why did you hide it? Because sometimes adults make foolish mistakes and take too long to admit them, Frank said. So now what? What's going to happen? Dorothy and Frank looked at each other. It was a question they didn't know how to answer themselves. Now we'll try to fix what went wrong, Dorothy said. Does that mean you won't send me to Denver anymore? Emily asked hopefully. Dorothy sighed. Emily, the situation hasn't changed. I still can't raise you alone. I'm getting older, sick. But now you're not alone anymore, Frank interrupted. I'm here. Frank, you have your own limitations. Physical limitations, not financial ones. I received a good insurance settlement after the accident. I have savings, my own house, and most importantly, I have a granddaughter who needs me as much as I need her. Emily's eyes shone with hope. Does that mean I can stay? If your grandmother agrees, of course you can. Dorothy was clearly torn. On one hand, relief at not having to part with Emily. On the other, the fear of getting close to Frank again and facing another disappointment. I need to think about this, she said. Of course, it's an important decision, Frank agreed. But can I keep visiting Mr. Frank while Grandma thinks about it? Emily asked. Dorothy hesitated but finally nodded. In the days that followed, Emily visited Frank every day. She helped with chores, he taught her to fish, and they talked about life, dreams, and the family they'd lost and found. Frank discovered Emily was a bright girl, but her schooling had fallen behind because Dorothy couldn't afford private school, and the local public school was lacking. Grandma Dorothy always says education is the one thing no one can take from you, Emily shared. But she gets sad because she can't give me a good one. And do you like studying? I love it, especially reading. Grandma taught me early, and I read every book I can find. Frank smiled. Emily's passion for reading reminded him of Dorothy in her youth, always with a book in hand. What do you like to read? Everything. Adventure stories, books about animals, even Grandma's cookbooks sometimes. But my favorites are stories about families reuniting after being apart for years. The innocence of Emily's words struck Frank deeply. A week after their reunion, Dorothy appeared at Frank's house, visibly nervous. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course. Emily's inside making lunch. She's learning to cook." "She's always been sharp for her age," Dorothy said with a sad smile. "Just like her mother." They stood in the yard, away from the house. "Frank, I've been thinking a lot these past few days. About us, about Emily, about everything that happened. And I think you're right. Emily shouldn't pay for our mistakes. She deserves a family. Does that mean—" "It means I accept your help. To raise Emily, I mean. But with conditions. Name them. First, we're not a couple. We're two people raising a granddaughter together. Nothing more." Frank nodded, though it stung. "Second, I stay in my own house. I won't live here with you." "Understood." "Third, any big decisions about Emily must be discussed between us. No acting alone." "I completely agree." "And fourth, if you ever tire of this responsibility, you tell me before disappearing from her life. That girl's been abandoned enough." The last condition hurt, but Frank understood. "Dorothy, I'd never abandon Emily. She's all the family I have left." "You say that now, but when reality hits, when you see raising an 8-year-old isn't as romantic as it seems, I won't give up on her, I promise." Dorothy studied him a long moment as if reading his soul. "All right, we'll try." When they told Emily, she burst with joy. She jumped into Frank's arms, then ran to hug Dorothy, then back to Frank as if unable to believe she finally had a whole family. "Now I have a grandpa and grandma," she cheered, "and no one's sending me away." Emily's happiness was contagious, but Dorothy and Frank still felt uneasy around each other. 30 years of hurt don't vanish overnight. The first months were hard. They tried to be civil in front of Emily, but the tension was thick. They disagreed about almost everything. Which school Emily should attend, what kind of clothes to buy for her, how to discipline her when she misbehaved. "Grandma Dorothy wants me to go to the local public school, but Grandpa Frank wants to send me to a private school in Portland," Emily complained one day, sitting by the river with Frank. "And what do you want?" "I want you two to stop fighting," she said, with the wisdom of a child tired of seeing adults argue. Frank realized that the constant fights with Dorothy were affecting Emily. The girl had gone from one emotionally unstable situation to another. That night he went to Dorothy's house. "We need to talk about our arguments," he said. "What arguments?" Dorothy asked, defensive. "Dorothy, we're confusing Emily. She went from feeling unsure about the future to seeing the two adults she loves fighting all the time." Dorothy sighed. "You're right. But it's hard, Frank. We think so differently about so many things. Then let's learn to compromise, to meet in the middle, for Emily's sake." From that day on, Dorothy and Frank made a conscious effort to be more diplomatic with each other. When they disagreed about something, they talked away from Emily, tried to understand each other's point of view, and looked for solutions that worked for everyone. Slowly, hostility began to give way to a functional partnership. They discovered that, despite all the hurt, they still knew each other very well. Dorothy could tell when Frank's back was hurting just by the way he went quiet. Frank noticed when Dorothy was worried about money by the way she bit her lower lip. Their relationship began to improve when Dorothy fell ill with a bad flu. Frank insisted on taking care of Emily while she recovered, and he also brought Dorothy ready-made meals every day. "You don't have to do this," Dorothy said when he showed up for the third time with a meal. "I know I don't have to, but I want to." "Why?" Frank hesitated. "Because no matter what happened between us, you're the mother of my daughter and the grandmother of my granddaughter. And you took care of both of them alone all these years. It's the least I can do." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. It was in that moment that the hostility between them finally began to fade. As the months passed, Dorothy and Frank developed a routine. He picked Emily up from school every morning and took her to his house where she had lunch and did her homework. In the afternoon, he brought her back to Dorothy, who helped her get ready for the next day. On weekends, the three of them did activities together. They went to the market, visited church, and sometimes had picnics by the river, where it all began. It was during these moments that Dorothy and Frank realized how much they had changed. She was no longer the shy, insecure young woman from 30 years ago. She had become a strong, independent woman who had raised a daughter alone and was now raising a granddaughter. He was no longer the impulsive young man who dreamed of adventures. The accident had forced him to mature, to appreciate life's simple things. One day, Emily came home from school very excited. "Grandpa Frank, Grandma Dorothy, I have news." "What is it, sweetheart?" Dorothy asked. "My teacher said I'm the best in my class at writing, and I can enter a writing contest in Portland." Dorothy and Frank exchanged proud glances. "That's wonderful, Emily," Frank said. "And what's the essay topic?" Dorothy asked. "Family. I have to write about what family means to me." Dorothy smiled. "You have plenty to write about." "It's true. Can I tell the story of how you two got lost and found each other again? How I discovered I had a grandfather, how we're now a real family?" The simplicity with which Emily saw the situation made Dorothy and Frank realize how much they had complicated things. To the girl, they were simply a family. The past, the hurts, the misunderstandings didn't matter. What mattered was the present, the love that existed between them. During the week of the competition, the three of them went to Portland together. It was the first time Dorothy and Frank had traveled together since they were young. At first it was awkward, but Emily was so excited that they soon relaxed. During the trip they began talking about things they hadn't discussed in decades, memories of their youth, old dreams, plans for Emily's future. "Do you remember that time we went to the beach and you were afraid to go in the water?" Frank asked. Dorothy laughed. "Afraid? I was terrified, those huge waves, and I spent 2 hours convincing you to at least dip your feet in. And when I finally went in, a wave knocked me over, and I swallowed half a liter of salt water. But you laughed so hard afterward, said it was worth it." Dorothy grew thoughtful. "That's how it was with you. You always convinced me to do things I was scared to try. And in the end, it was always worth it." "And now? Is it still worth it?" Frank asked, glancing at Emily, who was asleep in the back seat. "Looking at our granddaughter, yes, everything was worth it." At the competition, Emily took second place. When the results were announced, she ran to hug both grandparents, beaming with happiness. "I won! Well, almost won," she shouted. "You did win," Dorothy said. "You won a family who loves you." On the way home, Emily asked to stop by the river where Frank had saved her. "I want to thank this place," she said. "Thank the place?" Frank asked. "Yes. If I hadn't slipped here, you two would never have found each other again, and I'd never have discovered I had a grandpa." Dorothy and Frank exchanged a glance over Emily's head. It was true. The girl's accident had been the key that unlocked the door to their family's reconciliation. "You know what?" Dorothy said. "I think our family was always meant to come back together. We just needed the right moment. And the right person to make us see it," Frank added, looking fondly at Emily. 6 months after their reunion, the three of them had settled into a harmonious rhythm. Emily was doing well in school, had made new friends, and was growing up in an atmosphere of love and stability she'd never known before. Dorothy had gone back to her sewing work, but with less financial pressure now that Frank helped with expenses. She'd also started taking better care of her health, finally getting the checkups she'd put off for years because of money. Frank had found a new purpose in life. Besides helping raise Emily, he began teaching basic mechanics to kids in the community from his makeshift backyard garage. He discovered he enjoyed teaching, passing on what he knew. But most importantly, Dorothy and Frank had become true friends. They weren't the passionate young couple from their past, but they'd developed a mutual respect, a partnership built on their shared love for Emily and the understanding that they had both suffered and grown over the years. One September evening, Emily asked a question that caught both grandparents off guard. "Grandpa Frank, Grandma Dorothy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Dorothy said. "Do you still love each other?" Dorothy and Frank looked at each other, both blushing like teenagers. "Why do you ask that, Emily?" Frank said. "Because I see the way you look at each other sometimes. And because Madison from school says that when two people loved each other deeply when they were young, that love never completely fades. It just stays hidden, waiting for the right time to return." Emily's wisdom always surprised them. "Emily, love is a complicated thing," said Dorothy. "Sometimes people love each other, but life pulls them apart. And when they meet again, they're different people." "But different people can fall in love again, right?" Frank smiled. "They sure can. But it takes time and patience. And most of all, it takes forgiving the mistakes of the past." "And have you two forgiven each other?" Dorothy looked at Frank. "I think so. What about you, Frank?" "There's nothing to forgive, Dorothy. We both made the choices we thought were right at the time. We can't change the past, but we can build a better future." Emily smiled, pleased with the answer. A few weeks later, during one of their Sunday walks by the river, something happened that none of the three expected. Dorothy slipped on the same rocks where Emily had slipped months before. But this time, it was Frank who reached out to help her, and when she took his hand to steady herself, neither let go right away. They stood there, holding hands, looking at each other as if seeing one another for the first time in 30 years. "Dorothy," Frank murmured. "I know," she replied. "I feel it too." Emily, watching from a few feet away, smiled to herself and pretended not to notice. From that day on, Dorothy and Frank began rediscovering each other, not as the young people they had been, but as the mature adults they'd become. Dorothy admired the calmness Frank had developed, his ability to find joy in simple things. Frank was enchanted by Dorothy's inner strength, her capacity for sacrifice and unconditional love. They started having long talks after Emily went to bed, sharing unfulfilled dreams, regrets, and hopes for the future. Slowly, the affection that had always existed between them began to bloom again. A year after their reunion, on a starry June night, Frank gathered the courage to ask the question that had been stuck in his throat for months. "Dorothy, would you marry me?" Dorothy stopped rocking in her porch chair. "Marry? Frank, we're practically an old couple already. Why marry at this stage in life?" To show Emily, it's never too late to start over. To show that true love always finds a way back. And most of all, because I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, officially this time. Dorothy was silent for a long moment. What if it doesn't work? What if we find out 30 years have changed who we are too much? Then we'll make it work. Together. Like we should have 30 years ago. Dorothy looked inside the house where Emily was sleeping peacefully. And Emily? What will she think? Why don't we ask her? The next day, the two sat Emily down for a serious talk. "Emily, Grandpa Frank and I want to tell you something," Dorothy began. "You're getting married," Emily shouted before either could continue. Dorothy and Frank exchanged surprised glances. "How did you know?" Frank asked. "I saw Grandpa hiding a little box behind the books yesterday, and Grandma kept trying to smooth her hair all the time. And you both had that look like you were keeping a secret," Emily explained, laughing. "And what do you think about it?" Dorothy asked. "I think it's about time. You two take forever to make decisions, like turtles." Emily's answer made them both laugh. "So you approve?" Frank asked. "Of course I approve. Now I'll have a married grandpa and grandma just like the other kids. And maybe you'll stop sneaking looks at each other, thinking I don't notice." The wedding was simple, held at the local chapel, with only a few close friends and neighbors. Emily was the maid of honor, carrying the rings with immense pride. When the priest asked if Dorothy accepted Frank as her husband, she looked at him and said, "I do. Again, and forever this time." When it was Frank's turn, he replied, "I do, and I promise that this time nothing and no one will separate us." The kiss that sealed their union was met with emotional applause from everyone present, especially from Emily, who shouted, "Now we're a real family." After the wedding, the three moved into Frank's house, which had been adapted to comfortably accommodate the whole family. Dorothy kept her own home as a sewing studio, where she taught classes for other women in the community. Married life in their later years turned out sweeter than Dorothy and Frank had ever imagined. They respected, admired, and supported each other. They no longer had the fiery passion of youth, but they had something deeper, a love built on truly knowing one another, accepting imperfections, and being grateful for a second chance. Emily flourished in this loving and stable environment. Her school grades improved even more. She discovered talents no one knew she had, like drawing and singing, and most importantly, she gained the confidence and joy every child deserves. 2 years after the wedding, Emily, now 10 years old, entered a national essay contest. The theme was Everyday Heroes, and her essay told the story of a man who saved a girl in the river and, without realizing it, saved an entire family. When they learned she had won first place nationally, Dorothy and Frank cried with pride. "Our granddaughter will study at a state university with a full scholarship," Dorothy said, still in disbelief. "And she'll fulfill all the dreams our daughter never got to," Frank added. Emily, ever practical, said, "And I'll take care of you when you get really old, just like you're taking care of me now." Her promise warmed her grandparents' hearts. One December evening, 3 years after the wedding, the three of them sat on the porch watching the stars when Emily made an observation that summed it all up. "You know, Grandpa, if you hadn't gone fishing that day, and if I hadn't slipped on those rocks, maybe our family would never have come together." "That's true," Frank agreed. "Sometimes I think my mom, from wherever she is, found a way to make it all happen," Emily said, with the wisdom of a child who had grown up fast but hadn't lost her innocence. Dorothy and Frank exchanged glances. They both liked to believe that hope had played a part in reuniting their family. "Maybe so, sweetheart," Dorothy said. "Maybe she's watching over us from above." "I'm sure she is," Emily declared. "And I'm sure she's happy knowing we're finally a complete family." That night, the three stayed on the porch late, talking about dreams, future plans, and fond memories from the past. They were a family that had been lost and found again, that had suffered and healed, that had learned true love always finds a way back. The fishing pole that saved Emily that June day still had a special place in the house, not just as an object, but as a symbol of how fate sometimes uses the most unexpected moments to bring together people who were meant to be. And every morning when Frank went fishing by the river, he took Dorothy and Emily with him. It didn't matter if they caught anything or not. What mattered was being together, being a family, cherishing every moment life had given them as a gift, because they had learned that family isn't just about blood ties. It's about choosing to be present in each other's lives, about forgiving past mistakes, about building a future based on love, respect, and understanding. And most importantly, they had learned that it's never too late to start over. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this story. Do you believe Dorothy and Frank made the right decision by getting married after so much time? And what do you think about little Emily's wisdom in bringing the family together? Leave a comment sharing which part moved you the most and where you're following us from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.